Hi, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to put this on so I can hear myself as well. My name is Alison Killing. I work with maps and data, and I use it for storytelling, and I also use it for investigations. I do a lot of work with investigative journalists now. But what I want to talk about today is really the storytelling aspect. I'm going to base it on a project that I did over the past few years, which is called Migration Trail. And what I want to do is to talk through the ways that we use different formats, how we brought those together, what each of them can do well, especially the maps and the data that were at the heart of this story. So, what is Migration Trail? Well, Migration Trail was an interactive mapped data visualization. It lived online. And within that, we told the stories of two fictional refugees, who were traveling to Europe in real time over 10 days. We worked with writers from Nigeria and Lebanon and Afghanistan to write the voices of those characters, which you would then get as Facebook instant messages on your mobile phone over the 10 days as the story unfolded. So you'd be getting messages from the characters saying like, hey, we've just arrived on Lesbos, or like, oh my God, like we're waiting, we're going to go and meet the smuggler now, like we've got about 20 minutes to go. So that really brought it together in real time and to try and make it urgent and immediate for an audience. We also made a podcast series, and that told the stories of 5 real-life migrants as they traveled to Europe and tried to settle there over the course of two years. And that podcast also explored the wider issues. So this project began in 2013, 2014, which was at a point when a large number of people were starting to make these desperate, risky, irregular journeys through the central Mediterranean. There were a large number of capsizings and shipwrecks, a large number of deaths as well. And even though this story was obviously urgent and very important, it wasn't getting anything like the media coverage that it seemed to deserve. It was getting written about in some places, and there was often very good reporting, I should also add. But even when it was being reported, these stories often weren't being read. So I read something on The Guardian which did a lot of work on this subject, which said that of all of the stories that they put on their front page, this was the subject that these would be the articles that got the fewest clicks of any on their website. And so it seemed that there was a need for a different way to tell this story, and to do it in maps and data and to tell it in real time might be a good way to do that. So Migration Trail was built with a platform called Mapbox. It's very similar to Google Maps. The experience is quite similar to Google Maps in some ways. You have a map that you can zoom in and out and you can pan around. In some ways, it's a literal map. The distances between places, the buildings, the rivers, the coastlines, they're all there. But we also wanted to make a much richer map that could also contribute to the experience of storytelling. Now, maps are often thought of as being these neutral or objective things, but in fact, all maps serve the purposes of their makers. Any map maker will be choosing what to add in and what to leave out, and that, of course, affects the story that you can tell. So we wanted to use the map to add to the experience of the journey, and we did quite a lot of things that you might not do with a standard reference map. So, for example, we made the map get darker and change color over the course of the day and night, so that it became quite difficult to see what was going on at night. We also then added a lot of data on top of the map, such as an animation of wind. Wind is very important in this journey because as you're traveling over the sea, the wind affects the waves and the currents. And even small waves can be very dangerous for the sorts of boats that migrants typically use. So this is an outtake from This is an outtake from the data visualization, and laid over it is a part of the podcast. This is the head of mission on one of the rescue boats in the central Mediterranean, a guy called Ingo Wirth, who is talking about the sea conditions. No, it's not. I don't know if we're going to have the video play. So I think what I'm going to have to do is ask you to go and have a look at the website yourself after this. But I'll show you the URL afterwards. So this is what the experience looked like. This is the central Mediterranean at the start of one of the characters' journeys. David Igweyisi, who is a young man from Nigeria who's trying to travel to the UK. And this is a still of the wind animation. So as you click on the messages along the route, the character's instant messaging feed would open. And you could read what they were saying. They were all writing to people close to them. We asked the writers to both invent the character, but then also think about who it is that they're writing to. We wanted them to be writing to somebody with whom they really would share what that journey was like. So their boyfriend, their sister, their brother, their best friend. We also used the map and the zoom levels to structure the information on the map. So as you zoom in, you start to get a lot of personal information about the character. That might be how far they can continue traveling with the level of phone battery that they have left. So you get information about their mobile phone. This map here is showing internet in central Athens, or public Wi-Fi availability, because internet is so important for people on the move. It's how you stay in touch with friends and family back home, and it's how you plan the next phase of your journey. Do you want to step in for a minute? We've lost the... Oh, we've got the visuals back. Thank you. Yeah, so this is Wi-Fi in the center of Athens. And then as you zoomed out, you would start to get more information that started to put the journey into context. So this is border walls throughout Europe, and also intensified border policing, which is obviously of huge importance if you're trying to travel to Europe irregularly. Then as you're zooming out further, you'd start to get things like real-time flights over Europe, which of course, as an asylum seeker, you can't take, because you can't get the visa that would allow you to get onto a plane. And then zooming out still further, we had these choropleth maps that showed statistics that helped to put the whole journey into context again. So this one was about where Syrians apply for asylum in Europe. Overwhelmingly, it was Germany. And then also the place that you stood to get the best chance of having your asylum claim granted. And that ranged massively across Europe, depending on your nationality and the country that you were applying in. Somebody who, with the same stories, same nationality applying in France would stand a very different chance were they to go and try and make a claim in the UK, or to make that same claim in Denmark or Greece or Sweden. What we wanted to do with these zoom levels and connecting this was to try and connect these personal stories to the political and the social context that helped to shape them. So what are maps good at? Well, within this story in particular, across 2015 and 2016, there was a huge amount that was being written and said. Often that came in the form of news reports, and that format, although, as I said already, there was some absolutely fantastic reporting being done. That format tends to prioritize what just happened and to give a very, very fragmented sense, to put together a very fragmented set of stories. So at any one time, you might be hearing stories of an eviction in Calais, fires in Greek camps, Libyan people smugglers, drownings off Lampedusa. But unless you were paying very close attention and knew quite a lot about the subject, it might be very difficult to understand really how those different stories fitted together into one wider story. And that was something that we could do using the maps and using this format. Now, this is also an argument that is used for narrative, that long-form narrative can help to tie different strands of a different story together. What we could do in addition, using the map, was help to locate the story in physical places. And of course, there was a long-form narrative to this that we told over 10 days with these characters. Now, one of the things that I get asked most often about this project is where we found the data. So in fact, a lot of it was just from open source data portals and websites. UNHCR, which is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, has a very detailed data portal about where refugees are in the world, where they come from, where they're going to, also internal displacement. The International Organization for Migration has one. We also used a lot of statistics from Eurostat, and that's where you can get more information about where people are applying for asylum in Europe and the progress of those asylum cases. Much of the data, though, actually came from field research. So between 2015 and 2017, over the course of making the project, I actually traveled many of these routes myself. So in August 2015, I went to Lesvos, traveled... Oh, we've lost the... OK, thank you. I think they're trying to sort it out at the back. I hope this makes sense without. So in 2015, I traveled to Lesvos and then to Greece and overland through the Balkans and Hungary and Austria and Germany back to the Netherlands. In 2016, I went back again to Turkey and through Bulgaria and Greece. I also spent 2 weeks on one of the rescue boats in the southern Mediterranean, just off the coast of Libya. And in 2017, I went to Sicily, met a rescue boat arriving from the search and rescue zone off the north coast of Libya, and then traveled through Italy, over the mountains, over into France, and back up to the Netherlands. I also spent about 3 weeks in Calais over that time. And during that time, I did a lot of interviews with migrants, with NGO workers, volunteers, local government, border police. And that together gave me the information to be able to put this story together. It also became the raw material for the podcast. We've got the map back. We've nearly got the map back. OK. What that also meant was that I had enough detail to be able to pull these stories together, that I would know things about how the ticket machines in an Italian train station worked, and the frustrations of trying to find out how to do that. And so we could add a huge amount of detail to the story. Because when you're telling a story in real time, of course, you need a huge amount of detail to really bring that alive. So talked a little bit about what maps are good at. What are they bad at? Well, if you're working with a huge amount of information, it can be very, very difficult to tell people what to look at and in what order. So in this map, for example, which shows which countries Syrians are able to go to without a visa, you're able to get the main message of this map at one glance. There are very, very few places in the world where Syrians can go without getting a visa. Having taken in that big picture statement, you can start to look at the detail of the map of which countries it is that actually allow Syrians easier entry. This works well. As soon as you have more maps or more detailed information, you need different structuring devices in order to make that work. So the ones that we used, as I said, were the zoom levels, where we were showing different information depending on how zoomed in or zoomed out you were. And then also the narrative, the story, the journey over 10 days that allowed us to present different information to people and to pace that over time for the audience so that people could actually absorb it. The other thing that maps are bad at, they're very good at questions of where or how far, how what's the distance between two things? How long will it take you to get there? They can also answer questions about how much rain has fallen in a given place, what percentage of the population in Berlin is under the age of 15. It's very, very good at questions like that. What they're not good at answering is questions of why, and for that we actually needed a different format to work with the maps. And for that we made the podcast. Radio is a really good format for discussing things at length. As is long-form text, we could have chosen to use that as well. But one thing that radio is particularly good at, it's very good at carrying emotion. And you're also able to talk about things that happened in the past. You can have somebody tell you about things that happened in places that are very difficult for researchers and journalists to get to, of which there are many in this story. There's a lot of the action of this story that happens in the Sahara Desert, that happens in detention centres in Libya. And with radio, somebody can tell you about that after the fact, and that can still work well for an audience. So we used the podcasts for that, and also to have these more detailed discussions about asylum policy, whether borders work, why refugees don't get on planes, and try to answer some of those questions for the audience. We didn't use any film or photography in this project for a couple of reasons. One is just it didn't feel necessary. We had other formats that we felt could tell the different aspects of the story and tell a very complete one. And so it didn't feel necessary for that reason. We also wanted to preserve people's privacy and dignity, and so not to include photography if it wasn't necessary. But the last reason that we did no photography was that there's been a number of, I would say, iconic images which have attached themselves to this story. And I'm sure you've seen them. The image of the rubber boat, which is like overcrowded with people out at sea. And the other one is like of this long queue of people, this big crowd of people trudging over land. And both of those images have come to stand in for the entire story. And the problem with this issue is that, and was one of the ones that we wanted to address in this project, people already feel like they know this story. And that's one of the reasons that they actually often don't want to engage with it further. So we didn't want to use these images that were already so familiar, because we felt that that would allow people to sort of, that they would look at them, say like, oh yeah, we already know that story, and move on. We wanted to try and persuade them that in fact they didn't. We should have had a video here, but in fact we don't. But I'll tell you what was in it. One of the things that we were told when we were pitching this project was that maps and data were too abstract for telling this story. And how were we going to make this personal for people? Well, we worked quite hard to make this story personal, but we also found that this initial idea that maps and data would be too dry, in fact, wasn't true. So one thing that we did was to create these characters. David, a young Nigerian man who's trying to travel to his brother in the UK, and then Sarah, a young Syrian woman who is trying to travel to Germany. And we used those to sort of really be the human face of this story. We built a series of Facebook bots that could deliver these characters instant messages to the audience in their mobile phones, so that people were really getting this in their personal space in real time wherever they were, so that they could keep up the story as it unfolded, and it could become very personal for them. What it also did was to sort of, you weren't only then seeing the moments when there was action happening, you also got to see the moments where there was boredom, and there was a lot of waiting in this project as you're sort of, or waiting in this story rather, as you're like waiting for the rubber boat to arrive, as you're sitting in the woods on the shore of Turkey in the middle of the night, as you're waiting to meet the smuggler, or having got your fake ticket, as you're waiting for the 3 days that it's going to take before you can go to the airport and try and get on that plane. There's a huge amount of anxiety that's involved in this issue for the people who are living it, and so to try and share that with the audience. For David in particular, who did a lot of the traveling over land and by foot, what I also found because I actually only experienced the story in real time at length myself for the first time when it went live. What we found as well was that it also allowed the audience to sort of share in the grind of the story. I mean, this trip is really hard work. Just the sheer effort of getting up every single day to continue this journey is very, very hard. And so it allowed the audience insight into that as well. The bots also served an important purpose on such a long project, which was about audience retention. That by getting notifications on their phone, the audience would also be encouraged to go back to the map and check out what was happening there. Whereas without that, it's very likely that people might have come and looked once and then not come back. We were able to retain about 65% of our audience over 10 days using the Facebook bots that we built. But the other thing that we found about maps was that, in fact, they're very personal. So when we were doing in production, we did a series of user testing exercises where we sat down and observed people using the project and asked them what they liked or didn't like or what they wanted to see more of, and observed how they were using the maps. And what we found was that people were actually zooming in on places that weren't obviously related to the story. So what we realized after a while was that Bulgarians were zooming in on Bulgaria, the Germans were zooming in on Germany, the Spanish were zooming in on Spain. And in fact, everybody wanted to see their own country. They wanted to know, where is it that refugees go in my country? What has the government said they're going to do? What are they actually doing? What they were trying to do was also to search for their own place in the story from which they could build out and try to understand it better. This was actually our most popular map. People spent an average of 20 minutes looking at this map. And again, it was because it allowed the audience to situate themselves in the story. This map shows which are the best and worst passports to hold, based on how many countries will give you visa-free travel. So it's pretty good to be from Western Europe and North America, and much less good to be from Syria or Afghanistan or Somalia. And that's not an accident. The data was also, some of the other data was also very personal. We used the International Organization of Migration's Missing Migrant database, which is a database of all of the people who have gone missing en route over the past 5 years. And we took that database, we geolocated it, we placed each incident on the map with the numbers of people dead or missing, the date that happened, and their cause of death. And that served as the background to this story. Just finish up, there was a few risks with location data that we had to think through very carefully. Maps are very sensitive, as is location data, and with such a vulnerable group of people that we were talking about, we needed to take this very seriously. So the first one is that although this is based on true stories, it's fiction. We can't show where people are in real time because that would put them in danger. That was something that was there from the outset of the project. Another thing is that we didn't want the audience to come to the project, see that a distress call had just gone out and call the emergency services and perhaps distract them from where they actually needed to be. And so to tackle that, we needed an onboarding process. We needed to explain that to the audience the first time that they came to the website. We also didn't want refugees to discover this project and decide to use it as a how-to guide. Again, the solution to that was onboarding and to point people to more reliable sources of information. And then finally, related to the first, even by showing places that real refugees use, we could make them vulnerable to attack. And so there were a number of places, such as warehouses where supplies are kept for refugees, also certain places where refugees tend to gather that in fact we fictionalized. This format actually worked very, very well for an audience. We got an average time on site of about 11 minutes, and we retained 65% of our audience over the 10 days with the Facebook bots. I'll just finish up by sort of telling you about another project, which is if you're less interested in the storytelling and want to have a look at investigations instead, I've just finished working on this project together with the Tactical Technology Collective, which is the Exposing the Invisible Kit, which looks at how you can use maps and satellite data and geodata for investigations. And yeah, thank you so much for coming, and I'd love to hear your questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry for the technical mistakes. You were great. Okay. Are there questions? Nobody?
Just one question, or two questions. First of all, the people had to watch together what you have done on Facebook and on your site, right? To understand the whole story. And the second thing is how many people worked on this, because it's technically ambitious, and of course you had to do all the research.
Yeah. So everything was available on the one website, which is just here, migrationtrail.com. So the messages were there as well, as was the podcast. But then if you wanted it on your mobile phone, that was in Facebook Messenger. The team for the project was, there were about 10 of us. The project was done over a period of about 3 years. I was the only person who was on the project continuously. And then as we got funding, other people would join. But we had a developer, graphic designer, sound designer, producer, assistant producer. We had 3 writers. We had an audio editor. And then we also had a number of translators, because we produced these stories both in the refugees' first language and in English. And also in Dutch, because this was a Dutch production. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I have 2 questions. The first one is, who was exactly the audience and how big was it and where did they came from, like kind of that? And the second one is there any possibility to see this another time, or is there like an app? Because you said it's all in real time, but there are possibilities to experience this another time, is it?
Yeah. So we launched this project in November 2017, and when we first launched it, we were broadcasting it on the website so that everyone who came to the project saw the same thing at the same time. We did that so that we could try and so that we were able to have discussion around it and have a sort of community watching this together. It's now available on the same website in on-demand form. We don't have the bots running though, so it's possible to go and see it now. It places a cookie on your computer, and then it just keeps track of where you are in the experience. The audience for the project, it was largely Western Europe and North America that we reached people with it. We had about 4,500 people over the first 10 days of the experience. I haven't been tracking the statistics since then. This is an independent project, and I think if you work, or even if you don't work for a large broadcaster, you sort of want to have this thing where you launch a project and 1 million people come. And in fact, independent projects tend to have a much longer tail. They get presented at events like this. We've just come back from South by Southwest. We were at Mozilla Festival like last October, and that is part of how the project also gets seen. So it has a much longer tail. Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks.
You said people were invited to comment on this story. Do you have any problems with hate speech or right-wing people?
No, finally we didn't. We didn't. I think we were very lucky in that. On Facebook, there's quite a lot of things that you can do to filter comments. You can filter certain words. You can also block certain groups. We had a very small number of trolls, but we were able to keep on top of just blocking them immediately, deleting their comments. We had to get ready to yeah, we had to do a sort of threat model and build a security plan around that. We had 2 people on standby, ready to like jump on any of our Facebook feeds or Twitter feeds and sort of help to deal with that, and the rest of the team on standby for that as well. And then also just part of our security plan as well was also the sort of personal security in case people sort of wanted to mess with the team in a way that would consume our resources and make it more difficult to execute the project. And that was sort of standard stuff. It was like password managers, 2-factor authentication to try and shut that down. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alison, for this amazing project. Yeah. Big applause again for Alison.
Cool. Cool. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
We